Welcome to the Bernard Lee Poker Show. We are continuing our interviews of the 2021 WSOP bracelet winners. And today we're going to switch gears a little bit. We're going to talk about limit hold'em. That's right, folks, not no limit, limit hold'em. Actually, the game that really was how people learned hold'em at first before the moneymaker craze. But limit hold'em winner, the $3,000 bracelet event this summer. It was event number 44, 162 entries, created a prize pool of close to $500,000. And first prize was almost $110,000. This gentleman beat out that field and is typically a cash game specialist, specifically playing in Borgata. But this Connecticut native is now a holder of a WSOP bracelet. Welcome to the show, Ryan Hansen. Ryan, thanks for joining us here on the Bernard Lee Poker Show.
Thank you for having me.
Congratulations on what an incredible accomplishment. Obviously, winning a bracelet is the dream of so many poker players, me included. How important was this for you, and was this even expected, because you're more of a cash game player than a tournament player, right?
This is something that I certainly never expected to happen to me. As you said, I don't focus on tournaments. I don't play a lot of tournaments, didn't have a lot of interest in tournaments, and the dream of chasing a poker bracelet was never really on my radar. That was just something, yeah, that'd be fun to do maybe one day or whatever, but it was never really a focus for me. But 2 years ago, I actually went to the first WSOP, played a couple of events there, had fun, decided to do it again this year, and look what happened.
Incredible that, like you said, it just kind of happens. The World Series, obviously a little bit different this year because of the year off for COVID, and then also because the Europeans weren't here. The tournament numbers are a little bit down. I'm not tremendously down. I would say that when I was there for the week or so, it was a little more surprising. Weekday events I thought were going to be tremendously down. They really weren't. They were just down that 20-30% based off of who can't come from Europe. But kind of the side action and the energy with regards to spectators and all of that wasn't really there. Did it feel different to you because you were there a couple of years ago when it was like such a crazy time?
I guess I felt that there was a lot of excitement anyway. I mean, yeah, there was a bit fewer players, and yeah, some of the side action wasn't necessarily as good as it was 2 years ago, but certainly the rooms were full. There was lots of tables full of dealers and poker players playing, so that's what I saw, and yeah, it was fun and exciting.
Yeah, and like you said, the events themselves didn't really seem much different at all. Like, to me, it was just when you're walking around, right? Like when you're walking around like 2-3 o'clock in the afternoon, the buzz wasn't there. But when you're actually in the middle of an event, I mean, it didn't seem any different at all, except some people are wearing masks, right? Like, I mean, that's really the only difference, right? You play in this event. However, you are primarily a cash game and to tournaments. And I'm going to ask you that question in a second, like the difference between the two. But I'd love for you to talk to my listeners. My listeners primarily play No Limit Hold'em. Of course, the majority of the world plays No Limit Hold'em. You have said that you were kind of someone who benefited from the moneymaker boom. Not necessarily that you jumped into poker because of it, but because moneymaker exploded the world of poker, you're able to kind of take advantage of it. Did you start with No Limit Hold'em and then move over to Limit, or how did you move over to Limit? Because that's unusual. A lot of people go like the other way. A gentleman, for example, Ronnie Barta, who's been on the show, who's won a bracelet in Limit, he's gone the other way, still plays Limit extremely well. But how did you get involved with Limit Hold'em?
So my start of poker, like I said, it was not so much moneymaker impacting me directly, but just the movement that he created. And then there was all these local tournaments at different bars or wherever at people's homes. And I sort of said, well, that'd be fun to try that. And so that's how I got my start, was with No Limit Hold'em tournaments in, local pubs or whatever. And then,
like free buy-in stuff, like the local pub free buy,
but small buy-ins, like $40 or $40.
Okay.
Whatever it is. Yep. Just fun stuff. Just, sitting around having fun. And I was absolutely terrible at first, of course. And,
right.
And every week I kind of felt like I learned something, and every week I made it a little further. Like the first week, of course, I didn't even last an hour before I busted. And then
what do you mean an ace isn't good here?
Right. Yeah. And then surprisingly, it was like about 5 or 6 weeks in, I actually won the whole thing, about 80 players,
Wow.
and it was like, every week I got a little better. And then of course I just, well, that's what I'm going to do from now on. But obviously that didn't happen.
Right.
So it ran extremely good that night, but it was definitely fun and exciting at that time to win something, so soon into playing poker. Switched over to Nolimit Cash, and I can tell you the hand. And I was sort of, every now and again I'd play like maybe online or something and play a little bit of limit and said, oh, this is interesting, but I don't know if it's really what I want to do. But then there was a specific hand where I was grinding, Nolimit Cash all night long, and had, I was playing like 2-5 and I was up like $800 and I had like 1,300 in front of me or something like that.
Right.
And some guy raises, and I call with pocket nines, and the flop comes 9-6-5,
right,
which seems pretty good to me, especially against the guy who raised.
Of course.
And we throw in a couple bets back and forth, and I think he like 4 bets me all in, and I'm like, oh crap.
Yeah.
Does he really have 7-8 here? Like, that's the only hand I'm beat by. Did he really raise with 7-8? And does he really have it? And at this point, I've already put in so much into the pot that I'm like, I don't quite have the odds if he has 7-8, but if he has anything else, I've got him. And if he does have 7-8, I still got 2 odds, 2 outs.
Exactly. You got all the redraws, right.
And so I call, and sure enough, he has 7-8, and the board bricks out. And so after 7-8 hours of play where I did really well, I ended up losing $500 and going home. Right. And I was so pissed. And it was, and I was like, you know what? This doesn't happen in limit. In limit, you have a hand like that, you don't get buried.
You lose like 4. You lose 4 or 5 bets, and life goes on. Move on. Right.
Yeah, exactly. So, so that hand in particular was really changing for me, and I said, I'm going to limit, and that's more or less where I've been ever since.
When was that? What year was that?
That was probably like 2007, 2008, something like that.
So it's fairly early in the whole process. It wasn't. So
a few years in. I started playing like 2004. So maybe like a few, tournaments, really strictly only tournaments for the first couple of years. Then started playing cash games for a couple of years, and then I switched to limit. And limit, for me, like poker's always supposed to be about fun. That's what I like always tell myself and always tell other people. And for me, limit is less stressful because you don't have hands like that you just get buried. And so it's just more fun, less volatile, and I enjoy it. So
and like you said, less volatile is the big thing, but there's less risk, but in some respects, not less. Well, less potential huge reward, because if the other way goes around, right? Like you could obviously, for better or worse, if it doesn't brick out and it pairs to 6, not only are you. You're not up 800 anymore. You're up 2,100, and you walk home and you're like, woohoo! So, if you hit that basically after the turn, the 10 outer, right? I mean, that's basically what it is: 1-9 and the other 3 cards, 3 outs each. If you hit a 10 outer, we could be not talking about this right now, right?
Right. I might stay with no limit, right? Yeah,
right. I mean, maybe you want a bracelet by then, but I mean, my point is that we wouldn't be discussing limit, right? I mean, so it's funny that world is there. So when you play limit, you're from Connecticut, but they talk a lot about playing at Borgata. Do you exclusively play at Borgata? Do you play at some of the Connecticut casinos as well? Like, where do you play? Where did you kind of get your chops for limit hold'em?
So I used to play a lot at Foxwoods, played the 2040 at Foxwoods. And actually, I know Ronnie Barta from that game a long time ago. That's where he started as well.
Kind of grew up together, for better or worse, back in the days as we were grinding away right around the Moneymaker era.
For sure. And then so I did that until about 2015. So about 6 years ago is when I started going down to Borgata, and just bigger games, better action down in Borgata. So that's sort of why I go there. I mean, I'm in Stamford, close to New York, so it's a little further to Atlantic City, but kind of worth the extra little trip.
Yep. And so you're playing limit, grinding away. You don't play in many tournaments because to be honest, there are very few limit tournaments. Every once in a while, whenever there's like a big Foxwoods, like World Poker Finals, there'll be a limit one, or Borgata, there'll be a limit one or two here, but nothing else. Any other mixed games that you potentially play, like horse or anything like that, or just primarily limit hold'em?
I switched over and started playing some OE recently, but and trying to learn some other games. The other games are fun. I actually played a great home game now that has like all the different games. We play like 12 or 16 games, something like that, which is great fun. And we're all pretty much amateurs in all of them, which keeps it fun. But definitely want to learn the other games and become proficient at them. But probably hold'em will always hold a special place for me.
Yeah, it's obviously very, very different, but limit concepts are somewhat universal in a lot of these games. So that's why I was asking. We're talking with Ryan Hansen, who won the $3,000 2021 WSOP bracelet in limit hold'em. So let's talk about this. As we talked about, no limit hold'em is primarily what the world plays. A lot of my listeners are no limit hold'em players. Can you give just a few items, a few tips, what you feel are your top three of what are the differences with regards to no limit versus limit? I know a lot of people talk about it, and it has been said that no limit is more of an art where limit is more of a science. I'd love to know if you agree with that or not. And then, like I said, if you could give like 3 solid tips for people who have to play limit for whatever reason, whether it's a home game or whatever.
I do agree with that for the most part. I think that I heard an expression once that said no limits for like the playground bullies, like if you want to bring it back to like elementary school days, and like limit hold'ems for like the math nerds inside.
That's funny. That's funny.
And that's sort of similar to what you say, the art versus the science. No limit, you certainly got to trust your reads. You're put to big tests. You're put to a lot of unique situations, where in limit you sort of like know it's like, okay, this is polarizing. He either has the nuts, or he's bluffing me, and you sort of get into those situations a little bit more. So I think you get used to the type of situation you're in limit, and you can kind of, once you've been in them enough, you're familiar with them enough, you know how to make those decisions. I think
it's like fold on the turn, or you're calling all the way to the river kind of thing, right?
Right.
Once the bet goes to the big bet, okay, I'm calling here. It's like 7-card stud too. Like once you call Fifth Street, you're gonna go. Like, I mean, let's go. There's a reason for why you're calling there, right?
If you call with the made hand on the turn, you're basically calling the river.
Yeah, there's no way you're not putting in. You're putting in 2 bets. You're not putting in 1. There's just no way, right?
Yeah, you're not going to fold for 1. The pot size on the river compared to the bet size is much larger, right, than it is in no limit. So your decision is more or less made at that point. So I guess that's.
And let me just take a quick step, because I want people to understand what you just said, because it's pretty important. Remember, for everyone who's playing no limit, on the river, someone could say, I'm all in, and the pot could be 10,000 and they go all in for, let's say, 30,000. So there's only 10,000 in the pot and you've just put in 30,000. If you go just with basic math, if someone puts in 1 bet, and let's just do a heads up scenario, right? Small blind versus big blind. If they put in 1 bet and there's another bet, now there's 2. They make a bet on the flop. There's 1 bet, 2 bet, there's 4. They make a bet on the turn. Remember, the bet doubles. So there's 2, there's 8 on the river. 8. The pot's now 8. And then on the river, if the person makes a bet, there's 10 in the pot right now. So you're getting 5-1 to make the call. The person just has to be bluffing 16% of the time. And then also, I'm not even counting that maybe you also add in the big blind ante. And so now you've got another, potential. So again, I just want people to understand that you cannot force somebody off of a hand by betting so much bigger. You're only making 1 big bet into a pot of what I just described, 10, if it was heads up. If there's any other players in there, this pot could be 18 bets, 20 bets, and you're only making a 2 bet. So it's almost impossible to get somebody off of a hand mathematically. Then it's really more of reads. Would you agree with all that?
Yeah, that's absolutely true. It's much more difficult to get people to fold and limit. It does happen. There is bluffing. There's definitely bluffing. One of my favorite hands, and it was just exactly what you were saying, where went 5-way to the river. I was totally counterfeited by 2 pair on the board, but I felt like nobody had anything. And I
Right.
bet $40 into an easily $700 pot, and I got 4 folds. That's like a once in a lifetime thing. That's like my favorite hand over the last decade,
Right,
where
right,
I got
right,
it to
right.
actually work.
Right,
But that
right.
is so rare in Limit to bet
course.
$40 into a $700 pot, you get 4
Right.
folds.
Right.
So
what other differences would you say for people who are so used to no limit, but what differences are in limit? Well, let's talk about starting hands. Like, limit, no limit, it's more about position, and people are starting hands, the ranges start going crazy. What about in limit?
I actually don't think there's much difference in starting hands necessarily. In some ways, maybe you have to throw away you can't play the suited connectors as aggressively, because in no limit you can win a big pot with those. In limit, there's only so big that the pot can get. So I'm not saying you don't play suited connectors, but you just got to be a little bit more careful about how you play them and where you play them. That would be probably the only difference I would say about starting hands. And again, I'm not a no limit expert either anymore. So
right. So what somebody had once said when I talked about limit was, for no limit, playing ace blank suited or whatever it is, even if it's a low card, still something that's possible. Some people play ace 10, ace 8 offsuit or whatever based off of position, but it seems like in limit, because you can't get like if somebody has ace queen or ace jack and no limit and they flop an ace, you can get them off the hand pretty easily, bet size. But like in limit, I don't care what you do, you're never getting them off the hand. So by you calling with like an ace 8 or ace 9 or ace 10, you're putting yourself in a really difficult and maybe troublesome spot. Would you agree that kind of stuff, decreases the range a little bit compared to no limit?
Well, yes, potentially. I mean, the thing is, there's no limping in limit, right? Everybody comes in for a raise. That's one difference between that and no limit. And
that's not forced.
As a result of
that's not a forced thing. That's just more of that you're saying that's what they do. Right.
That's in practice.
Right. In deuce to 7, it's forced, right? Deuce to 7, you have to, no matter what. But like I just want to make sure the listeners understand that you don't have to, but in general, if they come in that way.
Right. So they come in for a raise, and now, so you're putting in a lot of money, and compared to the end bet pot size, it's a much bigger ratio. If you're playing like, a 2-5 no limit game, you limp in for $5, you could win a $500 pot. Right. You can never do that in limit. If you're playing like a 20-40 limit game, they raise to 40, it's never going to be a $4,000 pot. You're going to win like a $400 pot. So you need to you don't want to pick your spots as creatively as you might in no limit. It's more a little bit more about power hands and playing power poker and the high likely hands to win, rather than the hands that you can snap somebody off with. I mean, in no limit, if those suited connectors, you can crack aces or kings or whatever and win the big pot. In limit, you crack aces or kings, okay, you win a few bets, they lose a few bets, you play the next hand.
Exactly. And like you said, it's more of, for no limit, it's the implied odds of potentially getting their entire stack. In limit, it is truly pot odds, because there's no like, well, I'm going to get his entire stack. You're not, because if the person's smart, you bet they're just calling. Like the action's done. You can't be like, I'm all in. You got to make your decision, or I can only put this bet in. That's it. God, I hope I'm forcing you off of the hand. And in general, most often than not, you're not going to force them off the hand. So that's why I was talking about like when I play it, when I've talked with people about limit, is that the range kind of shrinks a little bit, just in the sense of because of that factor, right? Like you just don't want to get caught with ace 10, ace flops, and the person has ace queen, and you're like, I just lost 4 big bets for no reason, that kind of thing.
Yeah. I mean, I guess in some ways the range probably does shrink, but you can certainly be creative, and especially with position, and if nobody else is in. So there's lots of opportunities to open the range as well.
Yeah. Well, anything else with regards to betting, no limit, et cetera? Like, no limit, obviously position is important, and opening raises and all that. In limit, there's a very set range, etc. It seems like in limit there is a lot more 3 betting, because that's how you put pressure on people, right? No limit hold'em, someone raises, yes, you 3 bet to isolate, but in no limit, you can actually also make a big first raise, and that isolates just that in and of itself. But in limit, it's only one raise, it's one bet. But the way to really put maximum pressure is if you're going to come into the pot next, now re-raise again, and now people are facing two bets instead of one, and that puts a lot more pressure, especially if it's a cold bet. Yeah, exactly, right.
Or two bets in the big blind, only three bets for everybody else.
Right.
So, yeah, I mean, as far as the betting structure, it definitely plays a bit differently, of course, because if you feel like you have the edge, you want to press it right now. Whereas in no limit, well, I don't know what to do in no limit necessarily, but it's like you might save bets for later. You might play a little bit cautiously, even though you think you have the best hand now, or pretty sure you do. You just want to see what the next card is before you overcommit.
Right.
In limit, you're pretty much willing to commit right now, because even if you get punished on the next hand, you're not going to get punished for your stack.
Right.
You're going to get
right.
So
you just basically have to make the decision and just kind of let's go. Worst comes to worst, so he's going to raise me, and then I'm going to lose one more bet, not my entire stack, like you talked about in the other scenario, the no limit.
Right, and you talked about betting, how the betting's different, and the thing with limit that allows you to do is either player can control the size of the pot, right? Because they can just start check calling, and then the pot can only get so big. In no limit, of course, the guy can shove all in on you at any time he wants, and now you don't have any control over the size of the pot. Your opponent has control of the size of the pot. In limit, whoever wants to make the pot small has the opportunity to do that.
Right. And so if I'm correct, what you're basically saying is that, so for limit, if you're going to go with it, it's very rare that you're slowing down or controlling the pot size, because the pot size is already controlled just based off of the sheer nature of limit.
No, if you're not sure where you are,
yeah,
you can put the break, like in no limit, right? You're not sure where you are. The guy puts a big bet to you, right? What do? You need to commit one way or the other.
Right.
In limit, you're not sure where you are. He can't put a big bet to you. You can just check call him down and find out where you are. It doesn't cost you that much to see. So you control the pot, because you didn't want to commit a lot of money, because your hand was marginal, maybe a winner, but marginal. So you don't want to commit a lot so you can control that and control how much you win or lose based on just how you bet.
When you go to Borgata, when you used to go to Foxwoods, etc., when you go to a casino, when you go to the World Series and you play against players who play limit, and I'm sure you see this all the time, you see no limit hold'em players who say, what's the difference? It's hold'em, whatever, let's play. And they sit down, and you can tell a no limit hold'em player a mile away compared to what a limit player is. To be honest, we also can notice it the other way around too, right? You see a limit player down, and they min raise all the time. You're like, what are you doing? And they're like, oh, I can raise more, that kind of thing. But when you see a no limit hold'em player sit down at limit, what's the thing that you always go like, ugh, he doesn't understand? Do you know what I mean? What is two things that you watch a no limit hold'em player do that my listeners right now are thinking, and they go, oh, I do that? Oh, I didn't realize that was a bad thing in limit. You know what I mean?
But yeah, the thing is that their reads are terrible. They don't understand the way the betting goes. What these bets mean, what a check means. A check means a different thing in limit versus no limit. A bet means a different thing in the two different games. Their reads are awful, because they're not used to the structure of the game and how it plays out. As a result of that, no limit players pride themselves on making big laydowns, and so they get lost in the hand. They're not exactly sure where they are. The guy is value betting against them, and then they make a big laydown, and they actually have the winning hand. And the guy who made the bet wasn't even trying to bluff him. He's literally just value betting his hand.
Right. He thought he was value betting it and didn't realize he was losing. Right,
exactly. And the no limit player would be like, oh my gosh, if he's betting that card again or betting that, he must have it. And they'll make ridiculously big laydowns, which just don't happen in limit.
Right.
So their reads are off because they're not used to the betting structure. And the one that blows my mind is, sometimes they show it. They're like, oh, let me show you the big laydown I'm making. It's like, that is just really bad play. You should never lay it down.
Right. The other thing that I noticed as well is that for no limit, obviously you can put maximum pressure right away. You start out with 100 big blinds, 200 big blinds in a tournament. Literally on the first hand, you'd be like, I'm all in, and then really put pressure on. In limit, that's literally impossible, right? Because you can't do that, because you have to wheedle your way all the way down. But the one thing that I've talked about with a bunch of people, like Michael Mizrahi, when we were talking about the 50 Poker Players Championship, is that the limit hands actually start playing bigger than the no limit hands when it gets really deep into the tournament, because all the bets are so big. We'll talk a little bit about your hand heads up, like the quad eights hand. I mean, there are only about 6 million in play or so. And there was 1.5 million in play in that one hand, and there was no raising. It was just bet call, bet call, bet call. And the bets get so big. So when that happens, what do you tell kind of players? Do you just really have to be selective? And when, later on in tournaments, especially, do you have to be very selective? Because once you commit in limit, it's very hard to get off of a hand, right?
Yes. I mean, it's sort of what you were saying before, where the range might be a little bit narrower in limit versus no limit games. And that would transfer over to tournaments. I'm certainly not a tournament expert. So to tell you the difference between early tournament play and late tournament play, I would just be making it up right now on the spot. I sort of just played my hands. I was fortunate throughout the tournament that I had a fairly sizable chip stack. So I wasn't too concerned about, the size of a pot versus, really dwindling down my chips too much. So I just basically played my game. I was able to play my game throughout the tournament without too much focus on it being a tournament versus a cash game difference. That said, it was interesting. I played my first mixed tournament where it was OE mix, 08 mixed, which was part limit and part pot limit. Yep. And at the beginning of the tournament, the pot limit was definitely bigger, but as we got further along, the limit hands were much bigger. And that's the issue with limit, is because nobody can go all in, nobody can make the big bet. Right. Is you sort of get stuck calling it down, and if you keep calling down, through the river, it ends up being a lot of money.
Right.
A lot of chips.
Do you find that we talked about, like, betting is very different in no limit hold'em and in limit hold'em, right? So betting a lot of times a continuation bet, etc. But do you find that no limit hold'em players who are trying to play limit sometimes try to play too tricky? You know what I mean? Like in no limit hold'em, you're always trying to maneuver and do this check raise and all this kind of stuff. Whereas in limit, you have the hand, I mean, and your quad eights, we'll talk about it again later. The quad eights is a perfect example. It's not like you check raised them, bet. And do you find that no limit hold'ems try to play a little too tricky when they're doing this, and sometimes they actually miss a bet?
I don't know. I really don't know. I haven't noticed that specifically. I know that they're not aggressive enough. They generally are too conservative with their chip. I mean, like I was saying, they don't have a good feel for the game. And so when people raise them, like a raise in limit means something different than it means in no limit. And so when people raise them, the no limit players sort of, their read is they put him on a much bigger hand than he has. And no limit players aren't value raising like the single pair or the second pair or whatever, might be a considered a really weak or marginal hand in limit, in no limit, because you're afraid that, hey, if the guy comes over the top, I'm done. I have to fold. Right. But in limit, you're allowed to be a bit more aggressive with marginal hands. And so no limit players don't do that enough, and they overestimate the value of the opponent's hands when they are faced with a raise.
And you're saying that in limit hold'em, more thin value raises are done than
absolutely.
And so because of that, if a no limit hold'em player they should, a lot of times it'd be more of like, just call it and see what happens, because it's only one bet. It's not like it's now for your entire stack, because a lot of times for no limit hold'em players, somebody makes that re-raise, you call, your whole stack is in on the next one, and right. They'll make that lay down at that moment. Whereas in limit, if they understand it, listen, you do have some value here, maybe your middle pair is good. It's better because this person is betting low bottom pair of some sort or whatever it is.
Right. Or a draw or bluff or semi-bluff or whatever. Right. I mean, second pairs beat semi-bluffs.
Yeah, right. 100%. 100%. Right. What about cash and tournaments? What for you do you feel are the big differences there? Because they are significant tournament-wise in cash.
Tournaments about survival. Everybody knows that, and cash is about winning money. Right. So that's the easy way to explain it. And how that drives your play differently is that in cash, if I have any tiniest edge, whatever the smallest edge I might have, I want to press it.
Right.
If you give me a 55%, I'm raising the guy every time, especially in limit where I don't have to, face the all in or whatever. In a tournament, you want to try to control some of that. Like I said, control the pot size a little bit more. Even if you're 55% edge, 60% edge, whatever it might be, you might not want to press that pot because you know that if you lose it, you're going to lose a bunch of your chips. Suddenly you're going to be short stacked. Lines are going to get uncomfortable, and your whole mentality changes toward the game. But if you just sort of keep the pot size small, especially when you're marginal in where you are, your edge is small. There's no reason to press those small edges.
Right.
That's what I would say. I think Norman Chad actually was criticizing my play at the final table for being too conservative, and I went in with that mentality. I'm like, I'm not trying to get edge. I'm not trying to get margin. I'm trying to win this tournament. Right. Like, I'm not trying to get the maximum value out of every hand I played. Right. I was trying to win the tournament. Right. So in a cash game, I'd try to get as much value out as I can out of every single hand, but I might not do that in a tournament.
Right. And it seems like, when you're playing cash, the way a lot of times it's described is a cash game is just a part of your entire life's cash game, right? So you shouldn't look at the 3 hours you play is I played cash today. No, that 3 hours is part of your, I'm making it up, 30,000 hours that you play. It's just part of that whole integral. So whatever, doesn't matter if you're up or down or whatever, the decision is you got to make the call. Let's forget all the other external factors. Whereas for a tournament, it's very different. You have to take those into considerations because the blinds are about to go up. There are other factors. There are whatever it might be. In tournaments, it's a little bit different because there are factors that matter now because there is going to be a finite time. It's over. Whereas in a lifetime cash game, your finite's when you're 6 feet under. I mean, like, that's it. Right. You know what I mean? Like, that's all it can be. So it seems like the big thing there. When we come back, we're going to talk more with Ryan about his win. We'll talk about his long heads-up battle and a couple of hands, especially his big quad eights hand when we return here on the Bernard Lee Poker Show.